Okay, Malachi chapter 2. This is kind of a continuation of the marriage counseling we got in chapter 1. This is still God and the priests, so the sons of the marriage basically they're still kind of going back and forth, and there are some pretty good arguments that the sons were not keeping their filial piety, if you will, for their father from the first chapter, and so we're going to see a continuation of that in this chapter. Now, as we begin this, though, I wanted to point out some things. This is from an article called Amos through Malachi, Major Teachings of the 12 Prophets by Blair Van Dyke and Kelly Ogden. They said, as a general rule, those living in and around Jerusalem in 520 BC were from one of two camps. First, returned exiles who hoped to rebuild the temple, restore the Davidic monarchy, and participate in true worship of Jehovah. Or second, the native population who had not been taken away to Babylon 70 years earlier. This second group was thoroughly immersed in pagan practices, and their religion no longer resembled the pure truth of God. Concerning the first group, very little is known about their dealings over the 70 years that separate Haggai and Malachi. One thing is certain, however, there was a marked rise in power of the high priest and his associates at the temple. Since Israelite culture revolved around the temple in every facet of life, the high priest and his associates in large measure secured the maintenance or collapse of pure religion during these years. This rise became pronounced at the death of Zerubbabel, who was the last known Davidic-line ruler in Judah. Upon his death, hope for the immediate restoration of the Davidic throne vanished, and priests filled the ensuant vacuum. They in turn were kept in check by prophets. So this is, if you remember, this is way after the Babylonian exile. The people are back, but again, there's that two groups. There's the group of people who were just the day laborers, didn't really own anything, the very poor of Israel. They got left by Babylon in Jerusalem, in this destroyed area, to try to eke out their own living. So they ended up working with other groups. They moved into other nations around for economic there was nothing in Jerusalem. It was destroyed. The city was burned to the ground. So they were moving out of the area to go to other places. Those that stayed had to figure out how to make a living and survive on their own. So then you have the exiles, the people that were in Babylon, and then they came back 70 years later. These two groups are mingling to rebuild the temple and to restart Israel as a nation, basically. And this is the temple of Zerubbabel, the second temple period. He's the governor that was put in after the exile, basically, to govern the area. So that's why it's called the Temple of Zerubbabel, because he was the governor of Israel during the commissioned, let's get this temple rebuilt. We talked about that with Haggai. If you remember Haggai's chapters, his book was all about encouraging the people to build the temple. They started, but then they focused on their survival and stopped focusing on prioritizing things of God first. And so Haggai had to correct them on that. And that was during the time of Zerubbabel. When Zerubbabel died, there wasn't another king. That was it. No, Zerubbabel had descendants, but they didn't appoint a king. And so the high priests took over ruling of Israel, basically, which probably fits in sometimes with some of the ideas and cultures of the pagan areas around them. But that was a challenge. So that was a big transition. And then we're going to see during the intertestamental period that transition furthers into what we would know as New Testament Judaism, basically. We're going to see that as we go along. So that's just give you some idea of what's happening here. So let's jump in and look at this dialogue between the priests, the sons of God, and God, basically. Verse 1, and now, O ye priests, this commandment is for you. If ye will not hear, and if ye will not lay it to heart to give glory unto my name, saith the Lord of hosts, I will even send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Yea, I have cursed them already, because ye do not lay it to heart. So again, if you're going to just go through the motions and not be a real priest, it's going to go bad for you. In fact, it's already on its way to go bad for you. So if you think about the idea, to whom much is given, much is required. Okay? When God gives us more, he expects more of us. If he says, here's your rules, he expects us to follow them, even if it's more rules than what they used to have in the past. So there's a higher expectation. And if we don't, our blessings become cursings. The things that God has helped us with are going to be things that go against us. So having God with us is very, very important. In fact, verse 3, he says, "Behold, I will corrupt your seed and spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your solemn feasts, and one shall take you away with it." So he's going to, basically, in the New International Version, it says, "I will rebuke your descendants," on that first part, basically. So this is kind of the idea of eye for an eye. This is karma. You're not going to worship me? Well, it's going to go bad for you then. This is going to come back. God is doing back what they have done to him. You're going to give me the worst. I'm going to give you the worst then. You don't sacrifice your best. I'm not going to give my best to you. Basically, this was what that's saying. Verse 4, "And ye shall know that I have sent this commandment unto you, that my covenant might be with Levi, saith the Lord of hosts." So Levi is the tribe of the priesthood holders. So people are becoming priests for hire, priests for profession, not priests by inheritance. The Levites were given the Aaronic priesthood, basically, back then, back in Moses' day and after him. And so he says, I'm going to bring back my priests, not these paid for priests, basically. And continuing on, he says in verse 5, "My covenant was with him of life and peace, and I gave them to him for the fear wherewith he feared me and was afraid for my name." So that, now, the word fear, really, another way to translate that is respected. So I will give him life and peace. I gave them to him for the respect wherewith he respected me and was respected before my name. So that's another way to read verse 5, basically. Verse 6, it says, "The law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and did turn many away from iniquity." So if you think of the idea, law of truth, this is what we call the Torah today, the books of Moses. That's what the Jewish scriptures are today. And when it talks about he walked with me in peace and equity, this isn't literally, Levi or the high priest walking with God, literally, like they're walking down the street together. This is more of daily habits and attitudes. He followed me, kept the commandments. So are you living the laws? Are you following God in your life? That's the good question we should ask ourselves from this. Verse 7, "For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts." So if we need to understand the law, we need to be asking God for it and talking to our priesthood leaders, like Levi. Basically, those who have that rightful priesthood is who we should be talking with and working with. Verse 8, "But ye are departed out of the way, ye have caused many to stumble at the law, ye have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith the Lord of hosts." So again, the priests are not following the law. They've reinterpreted things. They've taken the law and they've twisted it for their benefits, basically. They've changed things. It's not following the truth anymore, going through the motions. Verse 9, "Therefore have I also made you contemptible and base before all the people, according as ye have not kept my ways, but have been partial in the law." So again, keeping what they like and not following the parts that they don't like. They're handpicking the commandments, basically. Verse 10, "Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother by profaning the covenant of our fathers?" Now this is an important point to look at. So you can kind of see this idea of like Malachi is going, yeah, God is right in this. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Like, aren't we a people? Why do we despise each other? Why do we have animosity for each other? So this is really great, because if you think of verse 10 in the context of the two great commandments that Christ talks about, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy might and mind, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The two great commandments, that's exactly what he says here. Are we not all one Father? Did not God create us? And why are we hating our brother? So that's the two great commandments right there that he's bringing up. Now, verse 11, he says, Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. So what this means is Judah had formed a temporal or spiritual alliance with a nation that did not regard Jehovah as the Lord of heaven. That's the Old Testament study manual said that. So again, they went off and did this. Now we're seeing, this is interesting because usually we see Judah in the position of being the bride, the female role. But now we're seeing Judah marrying the daughter of a strange god. Judah's the husband now, marrying a strange god, being the man. So he's going on after other gods, not worshiping the true God, but going after other gods, following lusts, basically, to get married and to be with other religious, other philosophical ideas other than what God wants. Verse 12, the Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. Now the master and scholar is interesting. This is he who teaches such doctrine. So these are the people like profaning the Lord by marrying women who worship idols. And he who follows it, they both will be cut off. That's Old Testament study manual mentions that. So again, if you are teaching the people to not follow the commandments properly, you'll be cut off. Verse 13, and this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand. So your sacrifices are fake. You're making it look like you're pleading and working at it. But it's just an act. Your heart's not in it. And that's the problem. So now here's the rebuttal coming back, basically. So again, think of the marriage counseling ideas here. Verse 14, yet ye say, wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant? So this is kind of the rebuttal back, basically. So the Old Testament study manual said, some of the Hebrew men, tiring of their wives and the mothers of their children, were seeking the companionship of younger women. The wives would come to the temple and make an appeal to God at the altar. In this unfaithfulness to marriage vows, the Lord declared the men had dealt treacherously. The Lord was angry with these men because they did not remain true to their wives, but he also expressed anger toward the priests for knowing the problem and not executing justice. He told the men to scrutinize their innermost feelings toward the women whom they had loved in their youth, who had borne their children, who had loved and served them, and not to put away their wives. For the Lord doesn't like when that putting away. So that's like in verse 15, he goes on, he says here, and did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. So we can think of this from the marriage idea this is now kind of flipping the marriage idea, where now God is kind of the counselor, and the husband is Judah, and the wife is now heathens, the non-believers. And he's going, look, but you have a wife, you have a covenant you've made with somebody over here with me, but yet you're going with somebody who you haven't made that covenant with. So it's this same idea of like, just because your wife is older, you can't tire of your wife and just say, I want to go after a younger woman now. No, that's not how this works, guys. Honor your wife. Honor the covenants that you've made. That's really what it's talking about here. Be honorable with who you've made a covenant with. In a marriage situation, that's your spouse. In religion, that is with God. Honor that covenant you've made. So husbands and wife as one with God, that's what it talks about there at the beginning. Did he not make one? So he wants God-fearing children from the marriage. He wants people to follow him. He wants descendants and the ancestors to be that is, to still follow him. Raise people up, teach them the truth so that your kids will be obedient as well. And now verse 16, as he moves on with this metaphor, he says, for the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. So he's not, God hates divorce. He's not wanting you to go through a divorce. He wants to fix this. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So basically, he's saying, be careful what you learn and experience. Keep having spiritual experiences and not worldly ones. Heed your spirit. Listen to those inner feelings. Okay, men, it's more talking to you than the women. Get the Spirit with you. Do things to bring the Spirit in. Pray to God. Read your scriptures regularly. Go to church. Do things to feel the Spirit. That's what you need to be doing. That will help save your marriage literally, as well as your covenants with God as well. So that's important to look at, okay? God wants to avoid the divorce. He tried in the Old Testament. When you look at Jeremiah, he tried to do it with the people, but the people wouldn't listen to him. So verse 17, ye have wearied the Lord with your words, yet ye say, wherein have we wearied him? When ye say, every one that doeth evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delighteth in them, or where is the God of judgment? So again, this is that back and forth. Where did you're accusing us of wearying you, but where have we done this, basically? And so that's when they've switched evil for good, good for evil. Their people are pleading for God to help, basically, because the leaders have abandoned the poor and the widows and things like that, basically. So that's what we learn in chapter 2 of Malachi, is this debate back and forth. So let's jump over to chapter 3 as we continue the book of Malachi.